Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult video 185, the Vermont vampire scare. Some spooky stuff. I've touched on it briefly before. I believe I made a video already on Vermont myths and legends, and this was part of it. I wanted to elaborate on it a little bit more. So the basic premise here, and it's a partially true story, is that back in the mid-1800s, early to mid-1800s, you'll remember tuberculosis was the big bad guy at the time. Tuberculosis in New England was killing people left and right to the point where a large proportion of the population was sick and dying at any given time. It was a wasting disease, of course, TB. In a population that is not getting substantial enough nutrition, tends to slowly eat the body away. The person will, because they can't get enough nutrition to fight the disease, it will slowly destroy them. It's a respiratory disease, first and foremost, causes chronic wasting. It used to be called simply wasting disease, or consumption was the other term that they used for it. At the time, they didn't have a full understanding of the concept of germs, of viruses and bacteria, certainly of modern medical applications. And so they thought, well, this is rather mysterious. Basically, people are sporadically just up and dying. In New England, because of the superstitions of the era, and you can understand, this is already getting past the era of enlightenment. You're in the mid-1800s, you're starting to approach the era of like gas lamps and shit, and people still have this kind of weird superstition. What happened is that they thought, in some cases, that consumption was caused by vampires. That is, that the person was wasting away because they were being fed upon by vampires, and then what happened is occasionally, like for instance, what happened in Woodstock. This family lost, I believe, their son, and son dies, and then the sister, I believe, if I remember correctly, gets ill and starts, dying off of consumption. They found like tooth marks on her, which are probably just sores from the consumption, from the slow wasting of the body. They suspected vampirism, so they cracked open their son's grave, and lo and behold, he hadn't fully decomposed, and he had like blood trickling out of his mouth, like dried blood. Oh my goodness, our son's a vampire, so they decided to burn him and then bury him in the center of the green, like under a massive granite slab. There is actually an urn containing the ashes, the ashen remains of the heart of this individual lying under the green in Woodstock. It's been more or less verified that story is true. It's probably still there. Like, they should probably pry the slab up, put that in a museum, it'd be funny. Then maybe the vampires would come back, TB would spread, and then they'd be like, oh fuck, we're going to put it back where it was. No, Murphy's Law, it'd probably happen. Now, of course, this was predicated on several things. They didn't understand the concept of contagion. They were a population under stress. There wasn't enough food, often, especially during the winter months. They were basically living on a subsistence sort of situation. Yes, well into the 1800s in New England, that was the case. In fact, it was the case with most of the developed world well into the 1800s. The Industrial Revolution hadn't sprung yet, so people were still, there were still some problems in society, so to speak. But then you had another problem. Back then, the idea of disinterring a corpse or conducting medical studies on a corpse wasn't really there either. They didn't understand that if you put a body in a box away from the flies, away from, everything, and away from the sun, away from the rain, put it in its pine box and bury it, especially in cooler weather, like we're talking the colder months, that body will keep for quite some time. No, it won't be fully decomposed. It won't just be a skeleton. There will be flesh there. It'll be desiccated and fucked up, but it'll be there. Yes, the body has a tendency to outbreathe fluids during the decomposition process, leading to it looking like there's fresh blood on its mouth. It might not have even been blood. It was probably just a bacterial backwash from its guts slowly decomposing over time. They didn't understand this. The concept of studying the decomposition process never entered into their minds. It would have been considered, number one, a sin, and number two, absolutely disgusting by these people. They had a general distrust of the medical community back then as well, which makes some degree of sense because a lot of it was quack doctors, and so they ascribed it to vampirism. But the thing is, a lot of this vampiric lore that you have in the spooky New England setting, it really comes from that time. It comes, the idea of the vampire is like sucking on the blood in that manner and leeching its victims, causing wasting disease in the process. The spreading disease, the idea of blood as sort of a vessel for sickness, it sort of comes from that period of time. It's very interesting if you read about these things. But yeah, there's a little bit about the Vermont vampire scare, and there were other people as well that were treated similarly. That's simply the most famous case. But it was really not just Vermont, it was New England. Within the context of New England, we've got many cases throughout the whole area around that period of time because of the epidemic of tuberculosis in the lead up to the Industrial Revolution. Once the Industrial Revolution comes and food becomes, half as scarce as before, what we know is a person with TB can survive without any symptoms at all if they have proper nutrient intake. They eat enough calories, they have the right diet, they have, nutrients and so forth. They're not overworked and underslept all the time like people before the Industrial Revolution typically were. They probably won't even have any symptoms. If they do, they tend to be more mild. They're not going to get wasting disease. In today's world, we have the opposite problem where people waste away because they're destroying their liver and kidneys and everything else and getting all sorts of horrible diseases from eating too much. They've got rich people diseases. Yes, the poor have rich people diseases in today's culture. Very interesting to think about. That's about all. Peace out.